Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show I have Benjamin Wallace. He's one of my favorite authors. He just finished a book called The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto. Another book of his is Billionaire's Vinegar, which you should definitely check out. Welcome, Ben.
Good to be with you, John.
Yeah. So I don't want to go too deep into the book or books because they're both essentially mysteries, real life mysteries. But we worked together in the past, and I'm familiar with all your reporting and all that other good stuff. I wanted to come at this from a standpoint of a creative life. Right. So a lot of the folks who are watching, listening, are thinking, how can I escape the 9 to 5, or I can escape the cubicle and be a writer or be a creator. And I'm sure that you have some stories to tell about how amazing and lucrative that is for a journalist slash author in the current environment.
Yes. Well, I mean, you said it,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know, this may be sort of a self-evident thing, but I think it's sort of never been harder in some ways and never been easier in others. I mean, it's never been easier to publish whatever you want at any length and have worldwide distribution, right? I mean, you can just start a Substack. There's a bunch of other platforms you can do that on. And on the other hand, the sort of establishment publishing industry, both of magazines, newspapers, books, has never been more challenging. I mean, just the aperture seems to be getting smaller and smaller definitely for journalists. I mean, I think, if you just even look at the bestseller list now, there aren't, the vast majority of bestsellers these days are by someone who is either a celebrity or has some kind of large platform that brings with it a built-in following. And even in 2008, when I published The Billionaire's Vinegar, which just briefly for viewers, listeners, was subtitled The Mystery of the Most Expensive Bottle of Wine in the World, and was the story of what purported to be a bottle of 1787 Chateau Lafite, a red Bordeaux, that had belonged to Thomas Jefferson. The bottle was inscribed with his initials and auctioned off at Christie's for the then world record price of $106,000. And then sort of all of the drama that ensued after that, with questions about its authenticity and a lot of very colorful wine world characters intersecting with this bottle. But even back then, it kind of felt like, increasingly sort of a standalone book had a harder time getting noticed on its own merits unless it was attached to, again, a celebrity or someone with a following or platform. But that has become fivefold the case since then. I mean, so more freedom than ever to publish what you want, but less freedom than ever maybe to get it into, let's say, bookstores or into, a monthly magazine that publishes 5 features a month. Fewer and fewer magazines to do that in.
So I think there's 2 questions there. So the first one is, how do you continue writing something that may or may not get the kind of recognition you might feel it deserves, right? So like a book about Satoshi Nakamoto, fairly broad audience, but not exactly, because you still like a lot of technophiles, a lot of folks who might be interested in that. But it's kind of the bullseye gets smaller and smaller. Billionaire's Vinegar was a little bit easier. How do you encourage yourself to work on a project like that when you know that the audience might be fairly small? And again, audience, it doesn't equate to happiness or doesn't equate to anything, but it's kind of like something that you want. And that the possibility of getting it picked up is fairly small. If you have a story to tell, what encourages you to tell it in the way that you do?
Well, I would say 2 things. One, when I did The Billionaire's Vinegar, I mean, in hindsight, it might seem like that was a much more mainstream idea, but I remember at the time, I mean, I got a lot of reaction like, really? You're doing a book about like rare wine? Like that seems pretty niche, and it was kind of niche, but it wasn't niche in the sense that it still tapped into something extremely mainstream, which is just wine, right? But the kind of narrow channel that I was focusing on was still pretty niche. And with Bitcoin, I think I convinced myself that it was similar to wine in the breadth of its appeal, that even if you weren't yourself a crypto person, increasingly just being a citizen, you kind of needed to know a certain amount about crypto. And when I sold the book to Crown, and this is also kind of partly answers your question, which was in 2022, it was before the crypto bust. So it was at the really peak of the crypto boom. So it only seemed like it was getting more. It was already going mainstream to a degree it had not before. And it looked like it was going to continue to go mainstream. And this was before suddenly AI appeared and completely just, drowned out everything else. But how do you keep going? You get a book deal, right? I mean, I wrote a pretty detailed proposal, and if that had not gotten picked up by a publisher, I probably wouldn't have written a book. I wouldn't have been able to afford to write the book because it really was a labor-intensive project, and I needed a book contract so that I could essentially stop being a magazine writer and spend all my time on this book.
Should somebody who has a good book idea, they probably shouldn't quit their day job, right? They should. And what's the process to follow? Obviously, you're established in this space, but what's the process to follow if I want to do this myself? If I want to write a business book or something like that?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm not sure I should have quit my day job, but I did. But yeah, no one should quit their day job. I mean, first of all, I think that this is my career. It's your career, but like for most people, like unless you have made this your career, you really should not treat it as anything other than something you're doing for your own fulfillment, or because and have conviction that there's a readership for it, or it's mission driven and you just believe this book needs to exist in the world. That's the only reason to write a book. You should never do it based on, I think, any kind of expectation of the material or reputational gains of it. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
I think what you're saying. I mean, that's a nice cold dash of water, right? That's the view. But what would you recommend for somebody who's really dead set on writing this book? Do they hire you as a ghostwriter, and then you guys go together to your agent and try to?
I said say a few things. I mean, one, there's no reason not to write a book. If you really want to write a book, you can write a book. No one's stopping you from writing a book. It's like within everyone's power to do. I mean, something that I recommend to people, if you're, again, not like a professional journalist who has been doing this for a while, is do a Substack. I mean, why not start like blogging about the thing you're going to write a book about? Don't be precious about this final product of the book. Just start writing it. Write it in chapters. Make it public. I mean, that's a great way to sort of market test also and see what kind of readership you're getting, see what people like and they don't. You can course correct, see what's landing. See if sort of what your intention is what's being received. So there's absolutely no reason not to do it. I mean, another thing I often say, which I think is a really solid piece of advice, if I may say so, is like, if you have a book and you're looking for an agent, or even if you just have an idea and you're looking for an agent, the way to find an agent is to identify books that are sort of similar to yours, or as similar, you could say it's X meets Y, but they're at least in the same or adjacent categories as your book. They're the books that maybe in your, best case scenario, your book will be like or do as well as. Read the acknowledgments. Agents are always thanked in the acknowledgments, and those are the agents to target. I'll have people, who I know say, oh, well, would your agent look at my book? I think we share the same agent. He does not do fiction. So if someone says, I've written a novel, I was like, that's just a non-starter. Like, he's not going to look at that. But there are a number of great agents who don't do nonfiction and only do fiction. So I think that's the way to approach it. I think, I'm guessing online these days you can find plenty of good examples of book proposals, and that's the thing to model your book after. A piece of sort of anti-advice I would give, and I'm giving this because I recently was sent something that fits this, is do not use AI to create your book proposal. The book proposal is where you need to and get to show what you can do as a writer. So if your pitch is done by AI, it says this person's going to turn in a book written by AI. You really need to do the work, I would say, if you're writing a book proposal. To
throw more cold water on everything, why don't we talk about the rise of AI? What's the role of the author? What's the role of the agent, etc. In a world where if I want a book about, I don't know, billionaires vinegar, I could basically kind of produce one. Obviously using yours as the basis, but it's pretty quick. It's pretty fast that I could basically create some kind of like even a synopsis of your book, et cetera, using all these tools. Yeah. What do you think the future is there? I mean, coming at it from a scrivener like yourself.
So what is the future? I mean, I think people, or certainly a certain set of people and like a fairly large set of people, still like to work with people. So I mean, I'm just thinking when you mentioned the word agent, like could an AI do all the work of agenting, right? And part of the work of agenting is knowing sort of which editors are receptive to what material. And I'm guessing actually AI could do that pretty well and probably increasingly well. And the agent's job is then to, negotiate the deal, which probably isn't magic. It's based on the sort of what are the precedents, what are the comps, and an AI could ingest all of that and probably like negotiate pretty well and say, look, this is so, I'm not saying that Larry, our agent, is out of a job. But I also think like editors want to talk to somebody, they want to talk to another human being. Writers want to talk to another human being. So I don't know that people will willingly dispense with agents, even if a computer could do just as good a job at the functional technical stuff. With writing, and again, of course, I'm biased and I'm traditionally like a really late adopter and someone late to see what's going to be, catch on technologically. And I was this way with the internet even. And so maybe I'm doing that again. But I kind of think that what makes like all good writing, all kind of interesting writing, and for that matter, look at any of a number of other, media, is human flaws. And what I mean by that is like weird, like books get written because there was someone who had some weird obsession and came at it from some weird angle because of their weird psychology. And so I don't totally see how AI can have a weird psychology. You know what I mean? Or if it does, that it will have the right weird psychology. Like, in other words, I guess I think of sort of books and pieces of music or whatever as, in a way, kind of accidental. And I think of AI as not being accidental. Like, I think AI will be optimized to do a bunch of stuff, but how do you optimize AI to come up with like freakishly bizarre things that happen to catch on with enough people and then spread by word of mouth? So I'm not totally pessimistic about the core work of writing. I also, so far, while what AI can do with writing is impressive compared with what it used not to do, it still falls far short, I think, of good human writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice proofreader, but it's definitely not going to produce anything of extreme value. I mean, I think that's an interesting point. I think what you said, and you do have a lot of characters in your books that are unique, and you're of a school where detail matters. And actually builds personality. I forget what I feel like one of the guys in the Bitcoin book lived in an Airstream trailer or whatever. You mentioned that as a point.
Wait, that might have been
that's Garzik.
Jeff Garzik.
That's Garzik. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So Garzik was living in a trailer when you talked to him the first time, and bringing that up, I don't think I would bring that up of interest because it's like I don't care where it lives. That's not pertinent to this. I care that he said XYZ, and I can turn that into ABC, which is going to be another paragraph about Jeff Garzik. So I think that aspect of storytelling is still valuable. I just wonder how it breaks out of the noise associated with a culture that's going to be constantly producing stuff that simulates that weird psychology that you're talking about.
Yeah. Look, I mean, and even the point about the Airstream trailer, I mean, you could easily program an AI to say, like, look for quirky details of the sort you might find in like a book by,
Benjamin Wallace,
Simon Winchester, or whatever, like whoever. I mean, you can absolutely do that. And I've even experimented with asking ChatGPT to come up with magazine story ideas. And I'll say, in the style of, and I'll list like 20 magazine writers I admire. I'll be like, it should, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. And it did a pretty good job. I mean, I don't know if they were, and I was like, make sure they haven't written about it. The magazine hasn't covered it before. And none of its rivals has done a similar one. It came up with like pretty good suggestions. I don't know if they were ready for prime time, but they were quite impressive. And I think some of that you can do, but it's more like, why did you write the book is somehow, like, I think often inseparable from the book itself. And will AI ever have a good answer to that why question other than because I was programmed to?
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, we have to answer that question eventually, or maybe we don't have to answer that question because I mean, who knows what the definition of that AI is? What's the next book going to be?
You're gonna send me an unsolicited tip over the transom. I would like to know. I'm waiting back into magazine writing, but yeah, I'm still at the tail end of promoting this book.
Were there any unusually exciting and or frustrating experience you had writing the Bitcoin book?
Sure. I mean, one thing is, when I first wrote about Bitcoin in 2011 for Wired, which is what got me sort of started on the topic. I mean, it had barely been written about, and the people sort of around the conversation about it were people who pretty much had almost never been written about, and maybe had never even been called by a journalist. And also, it was before the before journalism kind of went off a cliff in people's esteem. And so, it was no problem talking to Nick Szabo, talking to Hal Finney. I mean, our conversation was by email because Hal was using an eye tracker. Wei Dai. I mean, I think the only person who maybe didn't respond to me was David Chaum, the cryptographer. Between 2011 and 2022, when I started working full-time on this book, number one, crypto, blew up. And so all these people were sick and tired of getting called by journalists, independent of the fact that they were kind of tended to be this type of people who would look down on journalists anyway, libertarian, people. So just access became a lot more difficult. I mean, that was one issue. There were people who talked to me in 2011 who wouldn't talk to me in 2022. And then additionally, even though part of my Nakamoto book is kind of a history of all of the failed attempts to figure out who Nakamoto was, the fact that there had been all of those failed attempts had kind of soured a lot of people on the projects, right? I mean, it was sort of like another person doing this. And then finally, there is, which you're familiar with, I'm sure, the kind of taboo among hardcore Bitcoiners against trying to figure out who Satoshi is. So all of those were quite challenging. And then I guess the final thing I would say is, and this is just true of writing about anything on the internet or having to do with computer science, but trying to render a vivid and a vivid and narratively compelling story about what is often just an abstraction inside of a hunk of metal and silicone. It's challenging, trying to find ways to make that visualizable.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's techno thrillers, but usually a techno thriller has like somebody with a gun running across a rooftop as opposed to somebody sitting at a computer writing device drivers.
Exactly.
So it's fascinating. All right. Well, I'll send people over to pick up the mysterious Mr. Nakamoto. It's out now. Hopefully by the time you get to the end, you'll at least understand Bitcoin a little bit better when it goes back up to, what is it right now? 98 or something? Hold on, let me see on my thing. 95K.
Wow. All right.
So by the time it hits 200K, your book will be lauded as the source of all that is good and holy.
Exactly.
All right, Benjamin Wallace.
Good talking to you.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. The book is The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto, Benjamin Wallace. I'm John Biggs. This has been Keep Going. We will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener-supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.